between my 11 o'clock class and this class, so I got like lunch at Shelley.
That is so cool. Yeah, sometimes I like to get lunch at Shelley, but I actually get to have lunch in the dining hall tomorrow because I have to pick up my Hanging of the Greens tickets. I'm so excited. I missed Hanging of the Greens last year because I could have gone, but they didn't let guests last year. And I'm like, if I can't take Mike, I'm not going. But I did hear that there was indoor iceless skating last year, and I thought that was kind of weird. You didn't like it, Lauren? Was it?
The skates were terrible.
Oh, I like real ice skating. I can shockingly not fall on it. I mean, it's just like rollerblading. All right. So the last time that we were here, we actually ended class with a word problem. And thankfully, it does not involve math. So I'm going to reread the problem and I'm going to see if anybody figured out the solution. Okay. So in a village by a river, a chief guards a sacred stone statue. Every year, the chief goes downriver to the next village to collect taxes. There, he places the statue in a tub at one end of a hanging balance. To pay taxes, the villagers fill the tub on the other end of the scale with gold until the statue is balanced. This year, the chief forgot to bring his balance scale. How can he figure out how much gold to collect to match the statue's weight? Did anybody come up with a potential solution, Mariah? That's exactly right. How many of you got that? How many of you had no idea? That is okay. So basically the solution to this problem is you take the tub, you put it in the river, you put the statue in, and then you make a mark on the side of the tub where the water meets the edge of the tub due to that displacement. And then you take the statue out, you put the tub back in the river, and you keep filling it with gold until it meets that water displacement line. So here's the thing. This is a case where cultural context really, really matters. So here's why. So it turns out that task similarity has a very important role to play here. This story is very similar to a Chinese folk tale that is very, very well known. And we don't really here in the United States have a similar sort of story. So what we find is that when you are capable of recognizing that, hey, this looks like something similar I've seen before, 69% of Chinese people presented with this problem correctly solved it, 8% of Americans did. And so Chen, who actually looked at this study, said that for FAR transfer to happen, there are 3 different stages that have to happen. So first of all, we have to access the task or the story that is similar. So we have to access that similar story or that similar task. After that, we have to map those 2 tasks onto each other and note where the similarities are in terms of the problem and its structure. And then finally, we have to execute. So we know what the solution is in the folktale. We now have to take that same structural solution and execute the same solution within the new problem. So we're going to access the old story, we're going to map them onto each other, and then we execute our solution. Okay, everybody good here? All right. So in addition to task similarity, we also know that context similarity also matters. So researchers had groups of students solve problems either in a laboratory or in a classroom. And then occasionally they'd make them switch locations. And we find that when the location stays the same across problems, you actually get more transfer. So I have a greater likelihood of having far transfer happen if I stay in the same location for both problems. So in addition to the task similarity mattering, the context similarity matters as well. A problem that you solve here in the classroom might feel like it doesn't seem very connected to a problem that a similar problem outside of the classroom, because they're in completely different environmental contexts. And we know that environmental context can be a very powerful cue for retrieval. Additionally, time interval matters as well. And as I mentioned, in general, far transfer is more likely to happen when the task is similar, when the context is similar, and when the time interval is short between those two problems. And so researchers had children do hypothesis testing strategies. Now, not like the hypothesis testing that we talk about in research methods, so not that statistics stuff, but general hypothesis testing in kids, like, oh, no, I am not. That's rude. Let's fix that. That was weird. Okay. Let's see. Stop share. Am I still on? Okay. It says it's recording and it didn't actually sign me out, but let's fix it. Yeah, don't lie. I'm not signed in anywhere else. I'm not signed in anywhere else. Okay. I'm assuming it's working. If it doesn't record, it's not the end of the world. Most of you are here. We can get notes to people who need it, worst case scenario. But in general, they had children do these hypothesis testing strategies. And what we find is that generally a shorter time interval is better for transfer, not just for kids, but for you and me. If you want transfer to happen, you need to make sure that the different problems that you want that transfer to apply to, you want those to be close together in time. And again, this is because for transfer to happen, you actively have to be retrieving previous problems and previous strategies. So what a surprise that short time intervals lead to better transfer, because that involves retrieval. You're less likely to lose something in a short time interval. You're less likely to forget something in a short time interval. Make sense? Memory is involved here. You have to remember what you've done in the past to be able to get it to transfer. Okay, so we're going to talk about problem solving by analogy. Do not write this down, but try to draw the solution or write out your thoughts about the solution to this problem. So this is related to transfer. This is all about problem solving using analogies. So a doctor wanted to operate on a tumor. He wanted to use a laser, not just use laser. He wanted to use a laser to eliminate all the affected cells, and he had to make sure he got them all. However, the laser beam could also damage adjacent cells. The tumor was large and had to be taken out all in one operation, though the continuous use of the laser was bound to affect healthy tissues as well. What could the doctor do? So I want you to take maybe a minute and see if you can come up with a solution to that problem. Okay. All right. Did anybody have a potential solution to this problem? Yeah, Casey.
Use the laser to get like majority of the tumor cells that are like in the middle, and then like after that, just go around and get out the rest of the tumor cells.
Okay. So hold on to that. Okay. Does anybody else have a different solution, or does anybody have no idea? How many of you have no idea how to solve this problem? Okay, I'm going to give you another problem, and I want you to think about this. It might relate to this one. So if you weren't able to solve this, I want to give you another one. A general wanted to capture a castle. The castle was equipped with cannons and could easily target any advances and blow up armies at ease. The more concentrated the army, the worse the problem. The general knew that the best way to capture the castle was to accumulate all his resources and attack it in a single operation, though he was afraid that any concentration of this force, gosh, there are so many typos in this, I'm embarrassed, will be faced with lethal cannons. He didn't want to risk his soldiers so soon in the invasion and allow them to get demotivated before even reaching the castle walls. Okay, you're like, Dr. Gilchrist, how does this make sense with the tumor problem? Wait. One day, it suddenly occurred to him what he needed to do. He decided that instead of sending his entire army in one operation and risk fatalities, he could divide his army into battalions and send them as smaller waves at one after another. Now, the cannons couldn't reach all of them as the invasion force was not as concentrated as before, but they could still all accumulate on the castle walls and put pressure on the enemy. Indeed, he carried out his plan and captured the castle in record time with minimum casualties. Do you know how to solve the tumor problem now? No? So Casey actually got it partially right. What you're supposed to do is you use a weaker laser and you circle all the way around the tumor, much like instead of sending one whole army to one castle location, you send waves all around the castle so that the cannons don't have time to catch everybody. And that way you've got a greater chance of attacking the castle. So how many of you were able to get that with that hint? How many of you were how many of you at least noticed the similarities between the two problems? Cool. So that's good. You at least caught that. So this is a study that was done by Gick and Holyoake back in 1980. So it turns out that when we are given a similar problem that has a very similar underlying structure and solution, that actually helps our performance. Now, I don't really like the way that they did the graph here. It's kind of tricky. But what you can see here is that in the control condition, a good percentage of people never solve the problem. A few people are able to solve it without a hint. But in general, most people, if I give them the tumor problem, they're not going to be able to solve it. If I give them the general story, which is a very similar problem with a similar solution and a similar underlying structure, here's what we find. A very small portion of people, about 20%, never get it. With the hint, so when I tell you what the general knew how to do, a good percentage of people get it, and and a slightly larger percentage of people get it without the hint. So notice that once I give you a very similar looking problem, it suddenly makes it easier for you to figure out the solution. And if I give you that hint, you can suddenly figure out that problem. So if I give you something that is analogically similar, it often facilitates problem solving for the original problem. So research on transfer has typically focused on problems like these, problem solving through analogical reasoning. So for you to be able to solve these problems, you have to note the similarities between the current and past problems and notice where those similarities are for you to be able to solve that problem. So how do we successfully solve problems by analogy? You actively have to notice similarities between the current and previous problems. If you don't notice the similarities, you are not going to be able to solve this problem. This weather is kind of icky, but that's okay. You and I have differences of opinion, and that is okay. I like sunshine. I like sunny weather, which is why I am going to Florida for part of my Christmas. Like, it's 60 degrees down there, and when it's 60 degrees down there, everybody breaks out the parkas, but they still wear their flip-flops. No, it used to happen like clockwork at Florida State. I'm like, you're defeating the purpose of dressing for warmth by wearing the flip-flops. No, it's actually not that bad today. I could do without the wind. The wind messes up my hair and I'm prissy. Like, you have very long hair that you could put in a ponytail or a bun. And unfortunately, my hair never really wants to grow past this length without becoming just totally destroyed. I don't care. I look good with this hair this length. I always have, but it means that my ponytail is this. That's not really going to help you out very much. And I have layers, which means half of it falls out. Okay. So let's talk about the different types of similarity across problems. So I'm going to talk about each of these in a little bit more detail, and your book does as well. So first we have superficial similarity. This means that in this case, there is some surface level similarity, but these similarities are irrelevant to the solution of the problem. So an example might be the second story that I give you is also about removing a tumor, but it's a completely different solution and a completely different way to solve. So on the surface, they look like they're similar because they both involve doctors wanting to remove tumors, but the solutions are different. So any similarity that they have is solely at the surface level. What they have in common is not the solution. Then we have structural similarity. And in this particular case, the causal relationships in the major components of the problem are pretty similar. And you could argue that both in the general story and in the tumor story, there is quite a bit of structural similarity. You have a situation where you have a very powerful force that cannot be concentrated, but must instead you can't really concentrate the force because it will cause a lot of damage, but you have this whole thing that you need to get rid of. So the causal relationships between the major components of this problem are pretty similar. And then finally, you have procedural similarity. And this is basically how you get the solution, and the procedures that you need to do to get to the solution are similar. And both the general story and the tumor story have procedural similarity as well. The way to solve the problem is exactly the same. We take a weaker force and we circle it around the tumor or the castle to get what we want. All right. So if I gave you these three types of similarity on a test, you'd feel pretty good. I don't think I'm actually asking you that, but I might be on the test. If I asked you the definitions of each of these, would you feel pretty good? I'm not doing application for this one. We're just doing definitions. We'd feel pretty good. It is in your book as well. It is in page 366. If you have the ebook. I don't know what that translates to in the physical book. All I have is this. Okay, so one of the things that you may have noticed, many of you did not solve the tumor problem with no hint. Like Casey actually got pretty close. Like the first part where you were like, get the major stuff in the center, that would require a lot of concentration, but it's the circling around that is really the solution to the problem. But most of you didn't get it And most of you still needed that extra hint toward the solution after I gave you the general problem. So why aren't people doing this analogical problem solving simultaneously? Well, the part of the problem is that a lot of these analogical stories don't actually have a lot of superficial similarities. Now, let's be clear. Superficial similarities don't help you solve the problem at all, but if the topics are similar, you will actually start to think about the potential solutions and you'll start to compare them because they're about similar stories. So perhaps if we wanted more people to solve this, we need to have another story about a doctor trying to remove a tumor in a very similar way. Another thing that we find is that the role of semantic closeness matters as well. You're more likely to actually solve the problem if the analogy is semantically close. Again, this kind of relates to superficial similarity. Gig and Holyoake actually found that when you give people a similar story to the tumor story, you have a surgeon that uses rays or like x-rays rather than lasers, you actually get more people spontaneously solving the problem than if you give them the general story. So it seems like if we notice the superficial, that actually grabs our attention and forces us to compare and contrast these two problems much more easily than if they're about two very different things. So how do we improve this? One of the first things that we find is that it's easier to grasp the problem structure if you are doing a direct comparison to the problem with the same structure. So notice that I never said, hey, compare this problem to the other problem. You had to spontaneously do that yourself. I just said, hey, here's another problem, but I never told you to compare the two. What we do find, though, is with that radiation problem, with the tumor problem, participants who are actually prompted to directly compare the two analogies to each other are actually more likely to solve the problem. The only way that you're going to notice those similarities between those problems is if you actually do a comparison. If you don't do the comparison, how on earth are you going to notice those similarities? Anybody needs more? Oh, yep, I see furious writing, so I will wait. Everybody good? Okay. So we can find that there are actually some other processes that are involved in analogical reasoning. And so one of the things that we find is that working memory does influence problem solving. So remember a while ago, we talked about selective interference. Just in case you forgot, like, I know that we have one more exam coming up and then the final is optional, but for those of you that are thinking about taking the optional final, let's go back and talk about selective interference. So this is basically the idea that two different tasks that draw on the same working memory component can't be performed simultaneously. So if you can do two tasks at the same time, that implies that they use different working memory components. So two tasks that both use the phonological loop can't be performed at the same time, and two tasks that use the visuospatial sketchpad can't be done at the same time. I said sketchpad. I don't know why that happened. But what we find is that for verbal problem solving, that actually makes good use of the phonological loop. And if we do something like articulatory suppression, like saying the over and over again, what we find is that that hurts verbal problem solving. If we're doing a pictorial analogy, that's going to be disrupted by a task that taps the visuospatial sketchpad. So what this tells us is that verbal reasoning and analogies require good use of the phonological loop. Pictorial analogies and reasoning require the visuospatial sketchpad. Now, one of the other things that we do find is that for you to be able to solve a problem, you sometimes need to inhibit different parts of this process. So you do need to inhibit your first instinct to say these problems aren't different from each other. So inhibition is also involved as well. You need to inhibit those instinctive processes that say they're not different from each other. And Krawczyk and colleagues have actually found that the frontal lobe does seem to be pretty active in analogical reasoning to not only help us inhibit certain responses, but also to monitor responses and remain attentive to similarities between these problems. Okay. All right, so we're going to finish up by talking about expertise and deliberate practice. And we'll talk about what deliberate practice is. It's very different. It's very different from just practicing. Like, we'll talk about the difference very soon. So how does expertise relate to problem solving? Why are we talking about expertise here? So experts often spend a considerable amount of time building up knowledge in a very specific area. And this prior knowledge and this compendium of knowledge helps play a role in solving a problem effectively. So for example, when it comes to people asking me questions about how can I design a research study that looks at this? Well, I spent 6 years of graduate school, probably about 3 years of undergrad, 2 years of postdoc, and so well over 10 years at this point of doing different types of research studies and coming up with different ideas. So when people have ideas for research studies, I can figure out how to set one up right away. And that's because I've built up a lot of background knowledge to help me. Now, something that is kind of related to this is when you're building expertise, what you are actually doing is skill acquisition. You develop an ability through practice to increase the probability of achieving a goal. So here's what's really critical with expertise. If you're talking about problem solving through expertise, we are talking about knowledge-rich problems. We are talking about problems that it requires a great deal of background knowledge to be able to solve, like removing a brain tumor. Like, they don't just let anybody do that. And they should never let me do it. I drop things all the time. Also, I'm not a surgeon. I don't have the training, and I do not wish to go to medical school. I'm kind of afraid of blood. So is there anybody here that plays chess? Is there anybody here that likes chess? Cool. I feel like I should like chess more, but I grew up with checkers, and I'm not going to lie to you. When I found out that chess pieces can move multiple squares, I was like, that's not right. That's just wrong. However, I do find chess pretty cool, and I very much love the concept of pawn promotion. For anybody that doesn't know, if your pawn makes it all the way to the other row, it can be promoted to whatever you want it to be. You can basically make your pawn a queen, and that is very cool to me. I usually like the bishop piece because the bishop moves diagonally. But I could stand to know a bit more. However, the reason I bring up chess is that for whatever reason, a lot of our studies on expert performance look at people who play chess. When I was in undergrad, the graduate student that worked with me and trained me said that chess is basically the Drosophila of memory research. Now, for anybody who doesn't know, Drosophila is the species name for the fruit fly. The fruit fly is what cracked the human genome. So his whole point is that chess performance has helped us figure out more about memory than anything else. So you might find this kind of interesting. So let's talk about chess expertise. Woo! Chess. Such a fun game that they made a Broadway musical about it. No, seriously, have you ever heard the song One Night in Bangkok? It comes from, it's from the 80s. It's from a Broadway musical called Chess. Not even kidding, look it up. So expertise tends to follow, I say it tends to follow a 10-year or 10,000 hour rule, whichever comes first. And let's be clear, Justin Bieber and Dan and Shay did not come up with the 10,000 hour rule. Malcolm Gladwell did not come up with the 10-year or 10,000 hour rule, but odds are pretty good that's probably where you heard of it. Malcolm Gladwell's book, Outliers. This was actually developed by Herb Simon and Anders Ericsson about expertise. This is a pretty reasonable estimate given of the time that is involved to develop expertise in a given field. So folks, I am actually a memory expert. I've been studying it for over 10 years. And I did get my PhD like 10 years ago. And even then, getting my PhD took 6 years. So yeah. So what do we know about chess experts? So first of all, here's what we know. They have detailed knowledge of positions and different types of attacks, defenses, and openings that are stored in long-term memory. Now, compare that to me, somebody who never plays chess. I know that the Sicilian opening is a thing, but I can't imagine what it looks like in my head. I just know that it is a very famous opening. They can recall 91% of positions. Now, if we're looking at players that have less expertise, about 41% tend to make more errors. So here's what's really important. Right now, when I'm talking about positions stored in long-term memory, we're talking about positions and attacks and defenses that people actually use in these games. These chessboard configurations are not random. Watch what happens when you show them a random configuration. When you just scatter random chess pieces on a board and you ask chess experts and chess novices to try to remember them, you get no difference between the two groups. Being a chess expert does not make you remember random chess positions. What this tells us is that expertise only really comes into play when it is something that is meaningful to that person's expertise. So if I give them a board to remember that has a certain opening or a certain attack or defense, a chess expert will be able to remember it well. If it's a random board that would never actually exist in chess, that's nothing to a chess expert. They don't know what that means, and so they're not going to be able to remember it. Does that make sense? Okay, kind of cool, huh? Like chess experts don't have better memory for chess pieces. They have better memory for positions and strategies. So interestingly enough, William Chase and Herb Simon back in 1973 actually found that players tend to break down different chess positions into about 7 chunks. There's that number again. And they actually did this by doing something kind of cool. They would show people a chess configuration, like a meaningful opening or an attack. And then what the chess experts would have to do is take their own pieces from memory and reproduce the positions on the board. Now, here's what's really critical. And again, people are talking loud in the hallway. I'm a grumpus. I don't mind people talking. I just hate when it throws me off a bit. Okay, so what they would have to do is they'd have a configuration that they would have to try to reproduce. So it's up there for them to look at. And so then what they had to do is take their own chess pieces and recreate that on a blank board. So the idea is the more pieces that you can remember without looking up at the board, the more likely that is that that's part of one chunk. So the size of chunks were basically, okay, reproduce these positions. And then anytime that they looked up, that was a boundary between one chunk and the next. Sort of like how our chunk boundaries, when we're trying to remember things, are the pauses that we make between items. So here's what's really interesting. So in general, here's what's kind of critical. Not even a chess expert can get around a short-term memory limit. They make 7 chunks just like your novices do. But here's what's critical. Your experts make larger chunks. So they still make 7 chunks, but they're larger in size. And that does allow them to remember more. So then Ferdinand Gobet in 2003, and your book talks about this as well. So what we find is that some chunks are associated with certain attacks or certain defenses. And the more frequently that you use a chunk, the more likely that you're going to develop it into a more complex structure. So Gobet basically said that expert chess players start forming what is called a template. So this is basically, it has information about several different chess pieces. And these are going to be pretty large because they contain a fixed space and variable spaces. So they have a core, and then they have what are called slots. So slots can allow are variable, and those slots can change. So slots actually allow the template to be much, much larger than a chunk. And Gobet actually ended up finding that a template holds about 10 chess pieces, but it can actually be larger. So the slots allow for flexibility of the template to be used in a variety of different ways, but that core never changes. So Gobet basically says that expert chess players, they're more likely to work off of these templates than less experienced or novice chess players do. Chess players that are novices are going to be more likely to do things like chunks, but experts have templates. So chess template theory, as developed by Gobet, actually makes a couple of different predictions. So first of all, what we know is that because templates can hold a larger number of pieces, the chunks are going to be larger, but they're going to be fewer in number. So they're going to hold more chess pieces, but because they hold so many, you're probably not going to have as many chunks. Additionally, because these are experts, experts will access chess knowledge very, very rapidly. And experts do store precise locations. So pieces that are close together in terms of proximity should be a part of the same template, right? They're a part of the same chunk. Now, here's what's really critical. Chess expertise is domain specific. So here's what that means. When we talk about domain specificity, here's what I mean. I'm a chess expert, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm good at other things. It doesn't necessarily mean that I have a high IQ. My chess expertise does not necessarily help my reading comprehension. My chess expertise does not necessarily make me a better Go player or a better Catan player or anything like that. It is specific to chess and only chess. Thanks for sticking it out. How many of you are going to go try and play chess after this? How many of you are less inspired to play chess after talking about this? Hey, there's no shame in that. I don't know. I think if I had other people to play chess, I don't know. Somebody could start a chess club and I would be your sponsor because I want to learn how to play too. Okay. So let's talk about testing this rapid access of knowledge. So this is really cool. When we actually track eye movements for chess players, how many of you are familiar with the concept of eye tracking? Okay, a few of you. Is there anybody here that doesn't know about eye tracking? Okay, kind of. We're going to talk about eye tracking more when we talk about reading and language. But eye tracking, what we basically do is we give you kind of like a set of glasses, almost like Google glasses. Yes, I know those no longer really exist, but they have little cameras on them so they can track your eye movements and your fixations as you work on different things. And so they've done eye tracking and they've actually tracked the eye movements of chess players. And what they find is that expert players, they're more likely to fixate on tactically relevant pieces. So pieces that are critical for different types of strategies. They're less likely to fixate on a piece that does nothing. And then they've also found, so that kind of indicates if they're focusing more on the tactically relevant pieces, that they're starting to access that knowledge quickly. Additionally, another thing that they've done, this is kind of cool, and I'd have to be way better to do this, but I love the idea of it. It's called blitz chess. It's a chess game that is played in 5 minutes. So you basically play a game here, and what we find is that performance here is actually positively correlated with actual chess performance. For you to be able to do well in blitz chess, you've got to be able to very quickly access that chess knowledge. Now, who's going to be more likely to rapidly access that chess knowledge? An expert who's also going to do very well in actual chess. Yep. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about memory and the structure of templates. So we do actually find that expert players are much better at recalling precise squares on the board, so they can remember what squares and locations they need. Additionally, chess players are much better at evaluating attack and defense positions. So they're basically, these templates are based on strategy and tactics. Now, what we do find too is that experts are generally better at recall of random configurations of pieces. Now, my interpretation of this is that sometimes you can find a pattern in randomness. And because of that, you might say, well, this kind of looks like a particular attack, but it's not quite the same. So you can actually use that knowledge to see how the randomness differs from a particular attack or defense, and that might lead to better recall under certain circumstances. How about one more slide and we call it a day? Yeah, I know. Just one more. That's all we need. Just one more slide. Okay. So we'll stop and we'll finish this next time, and we'll start judgment and decision making on Friday. So how do doctors and experts make rapid and accurate diagnoses? So expertise is kind of critical for things like this as well. This is especially true when we're talking about radiology. They have to look at things like x-rays or MRI scans and basically make a call on what looks normal and what does not look normal and what potentially looks like a tumor. So you want to make sure you've got the expertise to be able to look at this. So we'll go ahead, we'll finish up talking about expertise next time, and we'll start with judgment and decision making. Have a great day, everybody. Yeah, we're almost done. We've got like 4 slides left in this lecture.